Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14, presented by Stakes. We are in the midst of previewing every single SEC team for the next basketball season. Today we get to the Kentucky Wildcats. Blake, I know it has not been recently the kinds of years that Kentucky is accustomed to having. Last year, of course, the Cats lost in their first game of the NCAA tournament, which resulted in yours truly donning the bag of shame for a while, having picked Kentucky to win the whole thing. The year before, Kentucky didn't make the NCAA tournament in the shortened COVID season. I know it's been a while since the Final Four, but guess what? I was doing SEC standings by 5-year periods, and I did them for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years. Guess who has the best winning percentage in the SEC in each of those 4 sample sizes, Blake?
I hope it's Kentucky, because otherwise, there'll be some upset people watching this video.
Right, right. Point is, even in a down cycle for Kentucky, I guess is sort of what it has been in lately. The Cats have still been the top program in the league by that measure, in what is a pretty good basketball time for the SEC. And this year, it is kind of an unusual Kentucky team compared to some other John Calipari teams that he's had at UK. And I'm going to give you a number to start with and see if you can get this. There's a number that I think is relevant to Kentucky basketball this year. The number is 4,692. I'm going to see if you can guess what that is. That's not all-time wins, although it might seem like it, but
couldn't even tell you. Couldn't even begin to tell you.
That is the number of minutes that Xavier Wheeler and Oscar Tshiebwe have combined to play in a career. That's your reigning National Player of the Year and also Kentucky's point guard. And here is where I think I start with Kentucky. John Calipari has had one and done point guard after another. This time he's got Wheeler, who's played a lot of minutes in college basketball. He's also got the reigning National Player of the Year. It's not often you get that guy back. It's really rare that you get an experienced, 3-year starter as a point guard plus the National Player of the Year in a separate package back. So this is kind of a unique starting point with Kentucky. Usually it is we're learning these names unless you really follow recruiting as the season starts. This year, 2 rock-solid, and that would be an understatement, pieces to build your program and arguably, well, certainly point guard, probably the most important spot on the floor, and then throwing a National Player of the Year. Point is, this is a different kind of Kentucky team because, yes, it has freshman talent, and we'll get to that. But it also has a lot of experience in places where Kentucky rarely has that in this era of college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, the knock on Kentucky is, I don't know, it's not been a knock. It's just been a reality is that, for a good stretch there, they were built around young players, very talented young players that would come in and win a lot of games, go off to the NBA the next year and rinse repeat. That was kind of the name of the game. But we've seen John Calipari really embrace, bringing in transfers and being able now to keep older guys there. I mean, let's be honest. If we had given a percentage on Oscar Tshiebwe returning in February, January, that percentage would have been low, right? I mean, again, even if we're looking beyond what the NBA draft projections, all that are, like we're thinking this guy's the unanimous player of the year. How in the world is he going to come back to college? But the fact is he's coming back. And, like you said, you combine your do-it-all big guy who, 28 double-doubles last year, best rebounder in the country. Will he put up the same numbers this year? I have no idea, but he's proven he can. And to me, that speaks volumes. Because last year, like I told you, he was one of the more dominant big men we had seen, I think, in a while in terms of just what he was able to do. But you combine that now with Wheeler, who, like you said, I know there's frustration at times with Xavier Wheeler. when it comes to shooting and wanting him to maybe be able to knock down more outside shots, maybe turn the ball over a little bit less, those kind of things. And we heard those frustrations last year. But the thing is, you have your two leaders in terms of your productive leader in Tshiebwe and your leader on the court at the point guard position in Wheeler, who is still going to be in charge of the offense. He's going to be the guy that's in charge of the defense. Like, he's the guy everything runs through as the point guard and just with the way he plays. So those are two nice things to have, and it doesn't hurt. Like you said, you're going to combine that with two freshmen specifically who are going to come in and I think really give them a huge boost in one particular area, which I'll talk about in a minute. And just the rest of the supporting cast. As always, there's talent across the board for Kentucky, but this is one of those teams, and we said it about last year's team. And look, up until a loss in the first round of the NCAA tournament, there was reason to believe that the pieces had come together. But there are pieces in place here in terms of having those different elements you need to win a national championship. Kentucky's got a lot of those elements this year on this roster, and with the added experience and all of that, bringing these guys back, undoubtedly, it's understandable why they're a preseason top 5 team.
Blake, you tell me, because my memory starts to fade after a while. I don't think that John Calipari has ever had this much returning experience. I mean, it's not just those two guys. And frankly, they've got more minutes played returning just in those two than he's had on probably most of his rosters, I would guess. They also bring back Jacob Toppin, who averaged 18 minutes a game last year. They bring back Lance Ware, who averaged 6 minutes, Damian Collins, who averaged 7. I know that's not big, but they've been in a college system and played, and those were both guys who were top 40 recruits out of high school. They got CJ Fredrick, who they were supposed to have last year. He's a big-time shooter off the bench, shot 47% from 3 in 25 minutes a game at Iowa 2 seasons ago, shot 47% from the field, period. Just between those guys, those 5 guys together, or I guess 6 guys, that's a lot of minutes. And you look and they've got a point guard in there, they've got a post in there, they've got some front court depth in there, they've got a shooter in there, which was a little bit of an issue for them at times last year. They'd recruited one for Davidson. I don't know that he always wanted the ball late in the game, but again, I look at not just the experience, but you look at the kind of pieces they have on this team, and they've got a really good foundation before you even get into the newcomers.
Yeah, by the way, I had to mute there for a second. Barry the Wonder Dog, he loves the school bus, and every time the school bus comes by, Barry gets excited. But he's also excited about this returning roster for Kentucky, because, like you said, they do, and they it's one of those things where you look at just the different pieces, right? Let's say Frederick plays last year. I think that's one thing you have to think about too. And I know we're looking at this year, but that's another 3-point element, right? I mean, he is someone that we've said over the years, and I know some years you can look at it in Kentucky and say, well, they've shot decent percentages, and maybe that's kind of something that for whatever reason we've just kind of always looked at, and it seems like it's like, I don't know, Kentucky just hasn't been a superior shooting team. It's not they've been a bad shooting team at times. It's just they've not been able to knock those down in relation to some of these other hot shooting teams we've seen in the SEC. Maybe, although as a conference, I pointed out before, SEC is one of the worst in the country when it comes to 3-point percentage for teams. So it's still a league that's kind of at the rim and getting the free throw line and those kind of things. But if you take Frederick coming off that injury, hamstring injury, obviously going to be one of their go-to guys from a perimeter shooting standpoint. You talked about, Ware's back too. I mean, he's just your backup for Oscar Tshiebwe, and he'll play some minutes. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but Collins is the guy that I think you've heard Calipari throughout the offseason. Like, and I think he even said it probably towards the end of last year, but like he's very high on him, and I think he expects Collins to just have a huge role on this team. I don't think there's any doubt he's going to have an expanded role, and there are definitely high expectations for him. So those guys are what I mean, that's part of your nucleus in terms of your regular rotation. And these are all guys that again have been in the program. It's not as though everyone's played 30 minutes a game, but these are guys who have been inside the program and understand, kind of what it you see it from just sitting back and maybe not playing a ton of minutes, but you see kind of what you have to do at Kentucky. And again, that's where you add that to Wheeler and Toppin and Tshiebwe and all those guys. I mean, experience is something that yeah, you're right. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at it, but in terms of the actual numbers, this is going to be one of his most experienced teams he's had there because, oh, by the way, you're adding in a guy like Antonio Reeves too, who comes over from Illinois State.
Yep.
He's a guy who's played a lot of minutes. So, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, you take all that together and the experience is there. And that's why, again, I think it's understandable why this team, there's a lot of optimism. Not that there isn't every year for Kentucky, but when you just look at some of those kind of things, and I'll bring up the other thing that I'm going to bring up here in just a minute, in terms of another area I think they're going to be significantly better in. But that is one area that they're going to be able to lean on a lot of guys who played a lot of minutes in college basketball, and even the ones that haven't at Kentucky, they've been in the program and they're going to get a chance to get on the floor a bit more this year. So.
Yeah, I completely I knew I was forgetting someone. I was forgetting Reeves, who played more minutes per game than anybody on the roster a year ago, albeit that was at Illinois State. 35 minutes a game, 20 points a game, shot 47% from the field, 39% from three, 82% from the line. And I'm looking at Blue Ribbon. Blue Ribbon's got him coming off the bench. So this is a very, very deep and talented team. And again, we haven't even talked about the newcomers. So that maybe I'm going to turn it over to you. What do you think about their freshman class?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Wallace and Livingston. I mean, look, these are guys that to me, like these are and you talk about Blue Ribbon and some of the things that we've heard Cal mention. He loves comparing guys, right, to previous guys he's had. And to me, like these guys in particular are the kind of guys that they are Cal guys in that they are not just a guy you're going to plug in and say, all right, here's what he's going to do this. And then everybody else is going to do the rest, right? He's just going to do this one thing. No, these are like guys that they're going to be able to do a lot of things. And like, I think that's what he loves about these two guys. Wallace in particular, I think it's what Eric Bledsoe, Gilgeous Alexander, like talking about that type of mold. And hey, you'll take that if you're
Sure.
Kentucky to have someone like that. And Livingston is somebody else, 6'6". I think you just look at kind of the athleticism we're going to get with him. Everybody's kind of talked about just the physicality, being able to adjust there, and that's the same with Wallace. I think these are two guys that will fit right into the way things are played in the SEC and kind of how the game is played. I think they are like they're basically very versatile guys. I know we use that word a lot, but I think these are two guys that John Calipari and his staff will love kind of putting in different places and saying, all right, here's where we need you for this next 5 minutes. And, all right, this next 5 minutes, we need you to do this a little bit. But, it's those kind of things. And you can't do that with everybody. But I feel like even for freshmen, like these are two guys that are set up to do those kind of things. And here it is, Chris. I've been teeing it up here for 10 minutes. These are two guys that are going to significantly help them improve on the defensive end of the floor. Because if you think about it, it's not that Kentucky was bad defensively last year, but I think some of those things, like we saw that in some of those games, right? Like we would point out, boys, they're just, even with having Tshiebwe, like they just were not crisp on the defensive end of the floor. If you look back, and this is what I did, because I want to make sure, just so everyone knows how important this is. You may say, well, they weren't bad last year. They were still probably, Ken Palm, they were 36th in adjusted defensive efficiency. That's pretty good, right? But here's the difference. Kentucky went to national championship in 2012. What'd they finish, Chris, in adjusted defensive efficiency? 7th. 2015, they go 38-0, right, until they lose that game. What'd they finish in defensive efficiency? Number 1 in the country. Go back to Memphis when Calipari gets Memphis to the national championship game. 2000, is that 2008? What did they finish in adjusted defensive efficiency? 2nd. So, like, all his teams that have gotten to that point have been elite defensive teams. We're talking one of the best 7 or 8 teams in the country in terms of the efficiency numbers on defense. I think this is where these two guys can really help them in that area. And you can see kind of a lot of the praise on that end of the floor in terms of, Wallace, they feel like just a great defender. Like, I think he's someone that's just going to come out. Chris, this. I love guys who want to play defense. And I feel like everything you've kind of seen from Wallace and the quotes, guy wants to play defense. So put him on the floor. And then again, Livingston, I think just with his athleticism and those kind of things, to me, he's like that X Factor type guy. Maybe eventually becomes like the glue guy for this team. It kind of holds a lot of this together. So clearly, I mean, I'm gushing over these two guys, but look, there's a lot to like. And I think this is something where they're really going to be able to help. And, too, they've got the 6'11" kid, and I know I'm not going to pronounce his name great, but I'm going to give it a try here, Chris. Onyenso, 6'11", 225, 5-star kid, reclassified from 2023 to this season. I think it's probably going to be more about the defensive end of the floor for him too. And that adds another element. I mean, we're talking about freshmen here, but I think when you just look at the makeup of these guys, these are guys that are built to be able to come in and help them on the defensive end of the floor. And again, you have Severe Wheeler, who I think is kind of like a bulldog on defense, not to make the segue as a former Georgia Bulldog, but that's kind of what he is though, right? Like he's kind of that bulldog guy on defense. I think Toplin's another guy defensively. We know what he can do. And again, Tshiebwe is going to grab the rebound. So I really like on paper the makeup of this team defensively. And I think that's going to be a big thing, especially with these freshmen coming in.
Yeah, I'm reading Blue Ribbon as we're looking at this. Onyenso, presuming I've got it pronounced correctly, and I don't presume that, but he had, 5 games with at least 10 blocks. That was one thing sort of lacking on this team a year ago. I mean, Tshiebwe is a nice.
I got a number for you, Chris. Yeah.
Okay, let's have it.
Here you go. So this is, again, something else to really think about, right? All right, let's go back to the teams that have made big-time runs, all right, for Kentucky. Let's go back to 2012 National Championship team. Chris, what did they finish nationally in block percentage?
That had to be up there.
I mean, they were number 1 in the country in block percentage. 38-0 team that loses that game after that. What do they finish in block percentage? Number 2 nationally. 2008 team at Memphis gets the national championship. What did Calipari's team finish there? 11th block percentage. Chris, last season, the second lowest block percentage since Calipari. Go back to 2001. So back to the Memphis days. So you're covering 2 decades. Second lowest block percentage the Calipari team has had last season. They finished 69th in block percentage. And that is something to really think about here. If they can get to the point to where they're blocking more shots, they're protecting the rim a bit better, I just think that's going to be huge. And again, I think that goes back to having the roster built the way that they have it built. It was clear to me, like Calipari identified some of these things and realizes, okay, the guys we have coming in, these are areas they're going to be able to help us in. And the trend suggests that, some of his better teams, and look, I always say this too, throw out the 2020-21 team. Because look, they finished 4th in block percentage. It didn't equate. We're not talking about just one stat here. There were a lot more issues with that particular team. But if you just look at some of these tiny little areas and you say, okay, what have been the things that have maybe set some of his teams apart that have had, those big runs, that's it. And, I think it's just being able to defend more consistently because, look, effective field goal percentage defense, we look at that too, right? Like that's another important number. 2012 team, they finished number 1 nationally in effective field goal percentage defense. 2015 team, number 1 nationally, effective field goal percentage defense. So, it tells you everything you need to know. Like, I think they just have to be not just a good defensive team. They can be an elite defensive team. And if they do that, I mean, they got the, they got the horses on offense to put up points. So that I think is your big storyline for Kentucky heading into the season.
Yeah, they have been in the 30s each of the last 3 years in adjusted defensive efficiency, which that's not bad, but it's like you said, if you want to know the difference between some of his elite Kentucky teams and that one last year, That goes a long way. And another thing, and this isn't usually a trademark of his teams, but they've been below average in forcing turnovers.
Yep.
I don't know if that changes this year. They may not need it that much. Again, that's never been really what Kentucky does. But, certainly if they get anything there, that helps.
Yep, for sure. And I think that's where, again, like Wheeler's going to be kind of the guy that, just the way he plays. I think that's where I think you can push in that direction, force some more of those turnovers. That's something they're going to be able to do. I think probably a bit more. Again, I'm so intrigued to see the freshmen specifically, just to kind of see how they come in. And it just seems like for now, like that's the expectation from that coaching staff, is for them to come in and just be right away guys defensively. As we always say, sometimes the offense can take a little time, but I would be surprised if we're not talking about those guys defensively coming in right away and kind of giving them a big boost in that area and potentially pushing them into, one of the elite defenses in the country, because that's going to be, because look, it's Kentucky, right? They get good size, good length, great athleticism. Like they've got all these things. And that's where just having Tshiebwe pack, I think they'll defend better in the paint, just because of, I think, of what their rotation is going to look like. And I don't know. I'm just, I'm always excited, like heading into the season, right? I always tell you, I look at the most optimistic things, but like when you dive into this Kentucky team, it's not that we're pretty much always optimistic, I think, with the Kentucky team every year because of the roster he built. But I don't know. There's something about this team that, even though we were very high on them last year, you almost wonder if the pieces fit together a little bit better, maybe on this team than in previous teams. So,
Yeah, there's a lot to like here. I do wonder when Wheeler's not running the point, um, where they go. Usually they've got a couple of point guards. I'm not sure that they've got a true backup point guard. I mean, these are first world problems. Wheeler has shown that he can play a lot of minutes, but he did get hurt a year ago, which that was an issue for Kentucky a year ago. They did have some injuries in some spots, but should be. Although I think they are short a player or two on scholarship, it should be enough depth there as you look up and down the roster to survive an injury or two at most spots. That might be the one spot where, if they lose Wheeler, then they might be that might leave a mark given the depth issues elsewhere. I don't know who runs the point in that case.
yeah, because like you said, I think the thing becomes, if you're looking at the roster right now, I think realistically from day one, you're probably looking at going, you can go 9 deep, I think, just in terms of how the roster's built. And maybe, maybe more than that. I'm not sure. But I think that's where, like you said, if that's the case, I mean, I think the most realistic thing is that you probably slide, you know, Wallace over there, and that kind of is how you have to play at that point. So I think I don't know that that's going to be as big of an issue, maybe, but from an experience standpoint, there's obviously a big difference between a guy who's played as much as Wheeler has, and then maybe sliding over Wallace into that spot. Which again, I don't know how many other options they would have. I don't think Reeves slides into that category, but because again, I think they want to mostly have him in a spot where he can knock down threes because that's what he does best. Make 76 last year, and him and Frederick, I think that's the thing, right? If you look at this team, you want to talk about a potential setup where if you do have Wheeler and Wallace and those guys kind of slicing and dicing, if you can kick out to Reeves and Frederick on the wings, like you've got a nice 1, 2, 3 point punch there. And I think that's kind of the fascinating thing too, because again, we can give Wheeler all the crap we want in terms of maybe not being able to make enough shots from the perimeter and wanting him to maybe see him make a few more of those. But this team, I think, having those two guys,
Yeah.
Frederick and Reeves, um, I think they're gonna they're enough. If you can put one guy on one wing and one guy on the other, in some side of, if they're out there on the floor together, I mean, you're talking about being able to really knock down a lot of 3 point shots. So yeah, I think they're understandable when you look at some of those categories with them, but that is certainly one. I think that they've got a lot of good guards. It's just how do they use them, and what's that kind of rotation look like? So
Yeah, just to wrap up a loose end, I would presume Wallace is the guy who slides over to point. He was a combo guard, classified that way as a recruit, but he did average 6 assists a game out of high school. So again, these are problems when your team is elite or approaching elite, which I think Kentucky certainly fits that classification. We tend to put some of those things under a microscope more than we would, say, a bottom level team. But anyway, deep and talented roster across the board. Jacob Toppin's another guy we didn't talk about a lot. He was a kid who was thinking about going pro, didn't go. He's coming back, more experience in the paint. We did mention that earlier, but I just look up and down this roster, and just they're. I guess this is no news for Kentucky, but it just is a roster where they've got a lot of parts, like you said, that I think fit pretty well together.
Yeah, and hey, you got some big guys that want to prove their shooting prowess as well. Whether it's Toppin or Tshiebwe, guys who want to go on and play at the next level. It's just threes put up by those guys. Chris, you got 5 guys out there on the floor shooting threes at Kentucky. Look out. Now I'm not saying that's going to be the case where Tshiebwe is knocking down 5 a game or anything, but that is kind of something too. But yeah, like you said, this is a team that's they're built to win a national championship. Everybody's response to that is going to be what, Chris? It's going to be 2 words. It's going to be St. Peter's. Everybody's going to bring it up throughout the entire season. Kentucky could go undefeated in the regular season. Everybody's going to be looking at that first tournament game because that's what you do. You look at those kind of things, but it's a different team. And I don't know. I always do this, right? Like I talk myself into these teams in the preseason because I just look at the roster. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see this team play. But this is one of those for sure because you're looking at this, and I think that motivation. Because guess what? You said it from the beginning. Kentucky's got a lot of guys coming back, which is not, that it's not that often you say that. Especially when you're talking about the magnitude of having the player of the year coming back and having your starting point guard coming back. But there's motivation there. Like there's a chip on your shoulder. I don't know how else there couldn't be, right? You're coming off of that. You're hearing everyone talk about kind of how things ended last season. You can use that and something else. Great tidbit from Blue Ribbon as well. They had their trip to the Bahamas this off season, right? And what were the results of the previous 3 times they went on their foreign trips under Calipari? 2011 team made the Final Four. 2015 team starts 38-0. 2019 team gets to the Elite Eight. So, that's the expectation in Kentucky is to get to that point, to get to a Final Four and win a national championship. But that's another kind of little fun stat you can look at if you're kind of looking at some of the trends with Kentucky over the years under John Calipari.
Before we wrap things up on Kentucky, shout out to our sponsor, Stakes. That is Stakes. Great app. They are the title sponsor of our channel. Lots of fun to be had at Stakes. You can go in and get your predictions on the record. We are putting predictions in the app every week. This is the middle of football season. We've got multiple predictions on every SEC game. By the way, we should do this for hoops too. Predict anything in the game. It is all free. See how you measure up against fans and influencers, including us. You can flex your wins by broadcasting your takes to our community of sports fans with just a few taps on your phone. You can earn credibility. You can build your public perceptions track record by winning competitions and earning NFT trophies for making the perfect call. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. That is STAKES. Sign up, use the invite code Southeastern14 and get a double welcome bonus. Okay, Blake, you mentioned the St. Peter's game. Not long ago, there was a team that had an even worse loss.
I know where you're going with this.
The one team that lost to a 16. What happened with that team the next year? Did that team spend the offseason getting burdened by the most embarrassing loss in NCAA tournament history, or did it go on to other things?
They may have went on and did some other things, although if you're an Auburn fan, you would like to forget what they did. But yes, I think, and I don't know how many Auburn fans are watching the Kentucky basketball preview video, but if you are, shout out to you guys as well. But yes, we all know Virginia went on to win the national championship after the UMBC loss. So they did not sit back and let everyone, well, they did. Everyone kind of took them to task there, but they came back with the ultimate redemption. And, for Kentucky, probably hard to sell redemption stories for Kentucky basketball to people outside of that.
Right.
But still, if you're a Kentucky fan and you're thinking about just the, you know, what you experienced after that loss and just watching that game play out the way that it did, you absolutely are more than motivated looking ahead now to this team. And yeah, it's funny because I always tell everyone, and everybody sees me do it every year. It's like for some reason, like just by default, I usually pick Kentucky to win the league. And it's like this year, I think I'm gonna have a choice between Kentucky and two other teams in particular that I'm really high on. The more I do my research on them, but I mean, there's a lot with this Kentucky team that I think there's a lot to like here as always. But getting Tshiebwe back, I just don't think you can undersell how
Yeah.
important that is for this team because let's remember, folks, like we're not. And look, there's a lot of Kentucky fans watching. They know this, but we're talking about a unanimous Player of the Year. Like it was clear as day. He was the best player in college basketball last year. I'm not saying he matches those numbers, but he's proven he can. He's proven he can put up those numbers. And now you've got a guy coming back with one goal and one goal only, and that's to win the national championship. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Any more parting thoughts on the Kentucky Wildcats?
No, we will have previews for every team in the SEC. I think at this point we will see we've done Arkansas and Kentucky, so we'll have previews for all 14 teams. I know we're in the middle of football season. If you're watching this, as we're doing them, but if you're watching this later, yeah, we'll have a lot of SEC basketball preseason content coming out. So be sure to check that out. And Chris, we're like a month away here. We're a month away from the start of basketball season, which is very wild to think about, but it's just right around the corner. So
I feel like baseball will be here before we can blink.
yeah, but you got to
It's
hit
a little
that subscribe
further off,
button.
but teams are in fall practice. We're going to cover baseball wall to wall. So
Subscribe button.
baseball, football, basketball. If you follow in the SEC, we're your guys. Hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.